I think one of the areas that potentially going on, and it's more found in the talent acquisition, the recruiting resourcing teams at the moment, is looking at social media monitoring. So there are tools out in the market now that will look at what people are discussing about your organisation out there on social media, and it'll give you some salience. It'll explain whether it's a negative, positive, or general view. I think that starts to become a much more interesting tool because it'll give you a snapshot in time and it'll give you real live data about where your employees are. So, for instance, if the CEO makes a big announcement, then if you start monitoring the chat in terms of social media and what's going on around that, you can see the impact and see where their employees are actually thinking about that, how that's landed. So that's all very real time. But again, it's one of those pieces of technology that sits off in the marketing arena, not necessarily in the HR arena. And again, I think this is where technology can really start to help, because again, we keep bringing this back to the analytics. You take that data and you put it into the employment data and everything else, you start to get some correlation behind it, and you can start to understand some of what the effects are in the organisation, the impacts.
Okay, but I would argue that social media monitoring will give me a sense, potentially, as well as customer sentiment, of employee sentiment. You've got Glassdoor and so on. But what about giving me a voice as an employee in the organisation? How do you do that? Even a survey is me reacting to your questions. Where's my own voice?
I think that there is value in understanding your employee brand, because that does have a relationship to how people feel. I think it may not be complete because it may be a mix of current and past employees or those who perceive that they're going to join your organization. It may be perceived as really positive by Microsoft employees that they've acquired LinkedIn. It might not. I mean, but the market may say, well, this seems like an act of confidence, and and this is going to have a positive effect on share prices and so on. So there would definitely be value in understanding the sentiment in the marketplace. I think sometimes it's about not getting caught in that and assuming that it means more than maybe it does, positively or negatively, right? Because the truth of the matter is there are still people potentially applying to your organization regardless, who may personally not have that market sentiment. And there are people in your organization who may absolutely disagree with market sentiment. I mean, there are organizations, for example, perhaps tobacco companies, who have quite negative market sentiment from some populations, but actually recruit very effectively and have very loyal employees. So it has its value, and I think it's necessary to ensure that your employee brand accounts for that, especially when you're doing active recruitment a lot of the time. But on a day-to-day basis, there's a huge amount of value in simply listening to your employees. Now, you can do that formally and informally. I think the issue with informally, if I were to take it to its most basic level, okay, managers should ask their employees for feedback on things, and that surely should be fed back in a bigger and a more cohesive way. So building systems within which managers can effectively escalate economically and efficiently opportunities to improve things to their leaders, that they can act on that. That kind of, at the moment, it could be a broken telephone, but it's good old-fashioned logic that should happen. And an employee should feel heard by the people that they work with, obviously. But we can formalize that structure. Now, some people say every day listening to what they write about or do in their emails is an intrusion in their privacy. So a lot of organizations avoid that with respect to their employees' perceptions of how they feel about that, rather than necessarily whether or not it's legal or whatever. But increasingly what we're seeing is that the value of what was a survey into employee engagement, which is to get a mark at a moment in time, which is to say, have we progressed on certain key dimensions, that still has its value. We can compare ourselves to the past, we can compare ourselves, what did we do to move that forward? So there's still going to be value in measuring progress against an engagement agenda. But what we're seeing increasingly is that it's far less structured in between times, that there's far more active requesting of information in the meantime. There are apps, for example, that managers can have on their phone. A lot of sales team leaders do this, where they just send out a Friday afternoon question, what are you going to close this week? Or quick things like that, which help them gather data from their teams or how they're feeling about a new product, maybe soon after launch, which again, quite a quick point from listening to analyzing the outcome to acting. Perhaps maybe next week we start a new campaign or we change our message. With IBM's Employee Voice platform now, you can do listening with formalized indices that are validated ways of predicting company performance. So, traditional census type measures and in survey type measures. But you can also do your own self-created indices, and you can actually search a whole bunch of indices that we have available. Do you want to check in on well-being? Do you want to check in on your sentiment about a particular thing? So you can listen as often as you want to, and then the question is, how often? But I tell you when this gets really powerful is when we work with our colleagues who are effective in change management. So they do a lot of organizational change, maybe around process and system change. And we can actually say, well, we know X team is going to be coming online on this change program. They're going to be affected in weeks 3 to weeks 12. What we're going to do is we're going to give them a little mini pulse with just 5 questions specifically related to the change on day 1, and again on day 21, and again on day 42. And we're going to see how they're feeling about the progress that we've made. And then perhaps in that group of 1,000 people, on the day 1 and the day 21 survey, we see there's a subset of 100 over there in maybe a particular office or area. And they're definitely not answering the way the rest of the group is. What do we need to do about that? Or do we just go out to their managers now and a subset of those and just ask those 10 people who manage those 100 people, what do you think's going on? So that huge amount of agility and being able to very quickly focus the questioning technology to exactly where in your organization you need it, and then still aggregate that back to an organizational level at any point in time. I think that's where the power is if HR is going to keep the reins on employee voice and deriving consistently actionable insight from what their employees are saying.